friends, I decided that I want to make a video about the basics of oil painting. I just finished this oil painting yesterday and I got a comment asking if I would be willing to make a tutorial. So let's talk about the two main differences between acrylics and oils. Number one is that obviously these are oil-based paints, which means you cannot clean up your brushes with water and it just makes the cleanup process a little bit harder. Secondly is going to be your dry time, which can be both a pro and a con. Your dry time is going to be multiple days, if not weeks, compared to acrylics, which dry in a matter of minutes. So the obvious pro is that you're gonna have a ton of time to blend, which can be amazing if you're working with portraits, skin. Switching to oils kind of just unlocked this new room for growth that I didn't even know I had. The con to that is that if you want to, say, do a lot of layering in your painting, you're gonna have to wait a long time for the first coat to dry to be able to add the second coat. It can be difficult to layer with oils. So let's talk about what you're going to need. Firstly, I use a lot of paper towels or a rag to consistently be wiping off my brush. Then let's move on to brushes. You are going to want a specific kind of brush for oil paint. Oil paint is thicker, and so it takes a very stiff bristled brush like this one and like the ones listed in my Amazon storefront. You can also find some amazing brushes at Michael's in the oil section of their brush section. Second, you are going to want some refined linseed oil. I know there are other options of oils that you can use to thin your paint out, but I just started with linseed oil and I've never switched. So if it's broke, don't fix it. Yeah, I use this, and then you're going to need some turpenoid. This is a turpentine substitute, but this is what you're going to end up using to clean your brushes. I think some people use this to thin their paint. I don't. I use it to clean my brushes. You are going to need a palette. Mine is really ugly and used, and you're going to need some oil paint. It really doesn't matter what brand of oil paint you use. On this painting behind me, used quite a bit of this level 1 Artist Loft beginner oil paint, and look at that. I think it looks pretty good. Well, I think it's good. I don't want to toot my own horn, but I'm pretty proud of it, and I use beginner level paint. Moral of the story, if you have the skill, the materials don't matter. Next, you're gonna need some canvas, and a pro tip, you should use gloves. I just ran out, otherwise I'd show you, but I like to wear rubber gloves when I'm painting. I learned my lesson the hard way that this paint and the turpentine and the oil, if it just gets on your hands for too long, it's really hard to wash off and it'll eat away at your skin a little bit, but don't let that scare you. Let's move on. All right, so let's do this together. I'm gonna show you the basics. I'm gonna put some oil paint on my palette. I'm going with red. I'm also gonna put some blue on there. I always have a glass with a little bit of linseed oil in it next to me when I'm painting, because I just like to dip my brush in it occasionally. I don't like to really pour it into the paint. I'm gonna dip my brush in the oil. You can see it's very saturated. And using that oil, I am going to mix myself some thin blue oil paint. Adding this oil just thins out the paint. It gives it a nice buttery texture. The more oil you add, the slower the paint is going to dry and the thinner it's going to be. And I'm just going to start brushing it on the canvas. This oil paint is really, really oily. It's very thin. You can almost see the canvas through my brush strokes. If I take oil paint that I have not added oil to, you can see that this paint is very, very thick. So thick, in fact, that I could lay it on in thick clumps if I wanted texture. You can see here the difference in texture from the paint on the left that had a lot of linseed oil to the middle to the far right that had no oil added. Now, another key to painting with oil paint is that blending too much can make your colors get a bit dull. So you want to use as many variants in your shading as possible. And let me explain this in the best way I can. When you're painting with acrylic paint, you could put blue right next to red and you could blend them together. And you could make a very seamless transition just using those two colors. Now with oil paint, you can almost see that the center becomes brown. It becomes dull and muddy. Some artists don't blend using oils at all. Now compare that to me mixing slight variants of each shade and blending those. Starting with my red at the top, moving on to my next variant, to the next. Oh my God, I went backwards. Wait, I didn't go backwards. To the next, to the blue. Now blend those together. And you have what looks like a much more seamless transition from red to blue compared to this muddy mess over here. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. If you want your paintings to be vibrant and not dulled out, do as little blending as possible and use as many transitionary shades as you can. But how do you blend so smooth? Well, if you aren't already aware, there are brushes made specifically for blending. They are fluffy. They are called mop brushes, I believe. There are small ones, there are big ones. So my technique for blending with oil paint, when I do the blending that I do, because I do a little bit, is I first start by blending with my small blender. And I'm just blending between each little transition, just softly. Then I'm moving down and I'm blending between these, and then between these, and then between these. And usually I'm wiping my brush off because I care more. Then I'm blending between these. And then I can take my big brush. And once I've blended between the transitions, I can just gently, even just by dabbing my brush gently across these colors, blend them smoothly. Look how smooth that looks now. Sometimes I do little circular motions, but you can see that already got a little bit muddy. So blend at your own risk. Oh God, I almost. Now let's talk about layering. Let's say that you want to add some strands of hair over the face and you don't want to wait for the face to dry on a portrait. There is a technique to layering on top of wet oil paint, and I'm going to show you what it is. The overall rule is you want to have thick on top of thin. If you try to do the reverse and use thin paint on top of thick paint, it's just going to smudge together. If I were to take this thick paint, glob it on, and then try to paint a thin line over the top of it with very thinned out paint, it wouldn't work. You can see that the blue only stuck towards the top of my brush stroke, and then I was just dragging my brush through the wet paint. Now on the contrary, if I have very thin paint that has quite a bit of linseed oil in it, and I take a big old glob of thick blue paint, the thick blue is going to layer on top of the thin red much easier. Okay, so how do you clean your brushes? Well, this looks absolutely disgusting because it's old and I've used it a lot. But this is just a little glass jar that I got at Michael's, but on the inside, it has this metal grate at the bottom. And I love this because if you have not already bought turpentine, you may not realize that it's pretty expensive. This little jug is like $30. And if I were to just fill this up, clean my brushes in it, and dump it out every time, I would go through one jug of this every 2 times I paint. I don't know what I'm saying. You'd go through a lot because you're not supposed to dump it out. And I made that mistake when I first started painting with oils. You're gonna fill this up, you're gonna wash your brushes off in it, and it's going to go from clear to brown. But that's when you're gonna put the lid on and you're gonna let it sit on a windowsill for a couple days. And you will notice that all of the oil pigment is going to sink to the bottom and the top half will be clear again. At that point, you will use another cup, you're gonna pour out the clear, clean turpentine. You're gonna stop when you get to the bottom before all the soot, I don't know, it's not soot, before all the oil pigment comes out. Then you're gonna dump out that part and you're gonna clean it out and put the clean turpentine back in. So really you're only going through maybe a quarter of it each time, but you should be able to reuse this, what is it, a chemical, a mineral? It's dangerous if you swallow it, it is fatal. Don't do that. All right, extra tips. When you are blending your colors on your palette, it can be helpful to use a palette knife, although I rarely use them, but I see that all the professionals use them, so I bought them because they must be what artists use. but honestly, I don't really use them. I just use my brush. Tip number 2, this isn't really a tip, this is a safety precaution. Use ventilation. Make sure that you're not painting all day in your bedroom where you're gonna go to bed and smell the paint fumes all day. The oil paint does not have a strong odor. You probably won't notice it until you leave the house and come back, but it is harmful. I would recommend painting in a room of your house that you don't sleep in and that you can take a break from being in, if you're able to do that. If not, good luck. A true artist dies for their craft. While you're at it, you should eat some paint. Okay, and then tip number 3, this is a personal tip from me. Give it 3 tries before you give up and decide you hate oil paints, because the first time I tried oil paint, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't add oil. The paint was so thick, I could barely get it to move around on the canvas. I didn't have the right brushes. I was annoyed, and I decided this is the worst medium I've ever used, and I never touched it again for like 4 years. And I didn't realize that painting with acrylics had, in some ways, I had reached the ceiling of how much more detailed I could get with my portraits. And so I finally decided one day to give oils another shot. And after a couple tries, I realized I just didn't know what I was doing, and it took some adjusting to get used to, because it is a very different medium. If you are used to acrylics, it's gonna feel weird. It's not gonna feel right, but if after 3 tries you still hate it, then you can give up, but give it 3 tries, because it took me 3 tries to realize, oh my gosh, I will never go back to acrylic paint. I hope this video was helpful. Let me know if you have any other questions or things you want me to make a video on in the comments below. Let me know what you think of my new painting. All right, have a great day. Go get creative.